How is it going, everybody? My name is DeMarco, and we have a brand new Starfield Q&A video coming from Bethesda, which is incredibly exciting with lots of really great details in this one, actually. More so, I would say, than the first Q&A video that we got. But thanks, Bethesda. I was just finished recording a video on where Starfield was, why we haven't seen it, when's the next Q&A video coming, the lack of appearance at the Game Awards, and then you release this video. So that's a whole morning completely scrapped in order to replace it with this, so thank you guys. But anyway, lots of really great information, and at the end of this video we're going to talk about, you know, the delay situation, or a second delay situation, if it's coming out on time, and when Microsoft might show it off again, that sort of thing. So we'll talk about that at the end. But first, this new interview was done between Jess Finster, once again, which she's great, as well as Will Shen, which for those of you who maybe need a bit of a reminder, he's working on the main quest for Starfield, but he was also the lead quest designer when it came to Far Harbor, which a lot of people responded to very well, especially because of the choice and consequences that were in the Far Harbor DLC. It's people's favorite part of Fallout 4 in a lot of instances, so it's great to see that he's taking on this role, and I'm really excited. This is a big deal for him, that he's leading the entire game, not just the DLC, so I'm very excited to see what Will can do, and I have really high hopes for what we're going to get. I'm very excited for Will's story here, of course with Emil Pagliuolo helping out as well in a lot of areas. So the first question asked is in regards to random encounters, and I will be honest, the answer left me wanting a little bit. I wish they would have dived deeper into the subject, but the specific question by Jess Finster was that people really liked the random encounters. It was a highlight for past games, and how is it being improved upon here?
So we actually have new tech to take whole locations that we've built and put them on the planets. Now you could say maybe you're going to an outpost and you actually discover there's a whole group of people there with a particular problem. Whereas, you know, before it might be just a person coming to you along the road. Now it's an actual whole location that can be put there.
What I always enjoyed about past games, specifically Skyrim, as it's just the most fresh in my mind, is when you go into a dungeon and you find out that there's an entire quest going on in this location, and it sounds like he's kind of talking about that. So you go into a Skyrim dungeon and you realize there's mages who can't get into the last room, and one of them actually ends up betraying you, or you walk into a dungeon and fall through a trapdoor and suddenly you're part of a necromancer's experiment. You need to get out of a cage that you're now locked in, right? Those storytelling aspects that appear in dungeons are what I found to be the most memorable, and I hope that's what they're going for here versus just the example that was given, which is, oh, a settler needs your help, go rescue them please, and there's not much more to it. I said settler, Preston, not settlement. Go away. What I would have liked to hear is that it delves into, you find out there's more complex things going on and they needed this specific person because actually the original faction that you were helping out stole them, and it goes to this gray area of who you're supposed to help, right? This really interactive, engaging story that plays out as you explore it deeper. Hopefully that's really the direction it goes in. Of course, there's room for some of that procedural content where it's just go help this person, go beat those enemies, kill this bandit leader. We got that in Skyrim too. I don't mind it here, as long as it's not the forefront of what exploration means in Starfield. Will Shen also mentions that they're only scratching the surface of this type of technology, so I think that definitely raises a discussion as to how this is going to be used in the Elder Scrolls 6, and once we see how it plays out in Starfield and whether or not people really respond to it well or really aren't fans of the way that it works, we're gonna see if it's a good or bad news or a bad thing for the next Elder Scrolls title. So the next question actually was on Earth and the Sol System and what the fate of our solar system is. And I'm glad that they're addressing this. A lot of people were thinking, oh, you won't be able to get there. Maybe it's just surrounded by junk and you can't actually land there. Seems like you might be able to. Maybe not everywhere. This might be one of the areas where you can only go to a specific location on Earth. But he does say that very early in the main questline, you go to, as they call it, the old neighborhood, our solar system, and you find out what's happening with Earth, and you actually get to visit Mars, because there's a new city that was mentioned today, which is Cydonia. Now, I have to give a shout out to a Reddit comment I found 2 years ago. They predicted a possible settlement on Mars by the name of Cydonia when that name first started coming around, and turns out they were right. So now we have Aquila, Neon, New Atlantis, Cydonia. There's probably more that's out there for us to discover that Bethesda just has not talked about yet, which is awesome. Looking forward to these bigger settlements. Now, whether or not it's going to actually be a much larger settlement or maybe smaller, because Obviously, that's the first off-world, off-Earth settlement that we have created, so maybe people have shifted focus then to farther reaches in space. Might be a very small settlement, Cydonia, but of course we do have Cydonia Security, which is a new firm, a new group within Starfield's lore, and we get to see, I guess, the origins of that by exploring Mars. It's neat to see. Will Shen mentions that we go to these locations specifically to uncover some of the early mysteries about these artifacts that we're discovering, so really curious what ties they might have back to Earth. Was it originally discovered on Mars, and that's how some of this started taking place, right? That's how we started exploring the solar system as we have. That was at least my early predictions when I was speculating about Starfield's story and lore and timeline. We'll see how accurate that is. So the next question brought up was factions, which is arguably one of the more important things that they could have talked about. The thing that gets me the most excited, I'm glad that it was brought up here, which is whether or not it's handled more like Skyrim or more like Fallout 4. Skyrim, of course, you could join every single faction, become the leader of all of them, which I think most people were generally like, why is that even a feature? Why is that a factor here? But on the other extreme is Fallout, where you go too far in a quest line and you actually get locked out of those other factions. So where does Starfield lie? And Will Shen does answer that it's more like Skyrim system, where these factions do exist and their storylines exist more independently from one another. They're not in as much conflict with each other. So that's a good thing for certain people, a negative thing for others. And I really do get both sides. On the one hand, it feels maybe like you as a player aren't having as much of an impact, even though choice and consequence is one of the things that gets brought up quite a bit when it came to this specific interview. On the other hand, if you just want to roleplay a certain type of character, the same way that you can in Skyrim, if you play a character that's part of the companions and it doesn't make sense to you to join the Dark Brotherhood, don't join the Dark Brotherhood, and it seems like the same applies to Starfield here. Now, while you won't be able to become the leader of every single faction in the game, which I think is a good thing, you can influence the direction they take, and Will Shen specifically points out two, which is, for example, does the Freestar Collective become more industrial or more justice? Are there only two paths that factions can go down? Are there three? Are there four? I think more is better in this type of a situation, but if you're trying to tell a more tight-knit story, it might make sense to limit that to two outcomes. I think what can really elevate the end game of some of these factions, if you do, for example, choose to say the Freestar Collective, we're going a complete justice route, we're going to make them all justice-based, what are the consequences of that, both good and bad? And if Starfield really does explore the gray area that exists in between some of these decisions, I think it will resonate with a lot of players much more. So for example, yes, you can go the justice route, but the Freestar Collective is really, really brutal in the justice that they deliver. Or you can go to the industrial route, but actually we're selling those the weapons that we make through industrialization are going towards pirates so that we can make money off of them, right? So there's a gray area. I think that's what a lot of people really liked about the Witcher's quests. So I do hope that they take some of that to make it seem like is this really the best decision I'm making? That to me adds a very dynamic element to the quest lines. Next up is followers, which is very important for any Bethesda game, especially when Todd Howard has been making a very important point to bring up how they're becoming more dynamic, how they're improving, how they're becoming more realistic in their reactions to your choices. So a lot has been, and we heard even recently with relationships and romance in the game during the Lex Friedman podcast and how that will play into Starfield's companions a little bit too. So very excited to see how they improve. And it seems as though Bethesda's taking it another step further, where we learned today that actually companions can make decisions for you on your behalf if you ask them to. So you might need to get into a certain building, you ask Vasco to help you out during dialogue, and there's going to be consequences of that. How do they handle it? Are they aggressive, where you might have some negative consequences, or they handle it very diplomatically and there's very positive consequences, right? So you're leaving it into your companion's hands, which is good. You might not have a particular skill set or a particular relationship with a faction or group to handle a certain situation. Sure, it's out of your control, but at least you can kind of complement you as the player with the companions. You can complement your abilities with the abilities of some of the followers you bring along, and I think that's awesome. Will Shen also talks about reactivity, but he only specifically mentions it to the main quest. He says, yeah, they absolutely will respond to the decisions you make during the main quest. Find it hard to believe that won't pertain to some of the major side quests in the game as well. So hoping to see it there, hoping to see it with some side content, of course, not as big of a role as some of the decisions you'll make during the main storyline, but should be there nonetheless, not just in certain areas of it. And then lastly, somewhat on the topic of followers, but breaching more into the NPCs in the game, their reactivity, which of course Todd Howard has spoken to a lot about how reactive NPCs are. Even Will Shen in a past Bethesda interview, in one of the Into the Starfield videos actually, which seems like forever ago at this point, Will Shen mentioned how having NPCs and followers dynamically react to the environments you're in and point out things that are going on in locations that you're near was very important to making them feel more realistic. So when it comes to NPC reactivity, he absolutely says, like followers, they'll have opinions on decisions that you make throughout the course of the game, but you actually have some bigger things that you can do.
For a few of the storylines, and including the main quest, who ends up with you at the end, right? You know, there are you'll be determining the fates sometimes, whether someone lives or dies, or whether someone's still in the faction or decides to leave the faction.
You might actually be determining the fate of certain NPCs, whether they live or whether they die, whether they're part of certain factions, which might bleed into some of the choices we mentioned earlier, where you can actually steer the direction that factions go in. You might, because you chose to go the industrial route with the Freestar Collective, does that mean that the current leader gets outed? Maybe he gets killed because of your decisions. Definitely seems as though there's some secrets that they're keeping to themselves, which is good. I like that. It's going to leave a lot for us to explore, but I'm very excited by everything that I'm hearing. My main concern, my main gripe, and what I really want to hear more about, or at least just have some concerns alleviated, is naturally when it comes to that procedural content. I'm not a fan of it. It's not my preference, but I do understand how it can add a lot of value to experiences if it's done right. So when we talk about having dynamic quests with dynamic settlements on dynamic planets, that to me just gets my brain going a little bit. But we'll see how it plays out in the actual game. And it's important to remember that Bethesda actually thinks of all these things, right? Bethesda, when they talked about whether the fuel management system was fun and they took it out because they tested it, they're thinking of a lot, whether how you explore a planet and whether or not you land on it and you have these big empty spaces. These are all questions that the development team have already asked. All of our concerns, I genuinely believe, are concerns that Bethesda internally has raised and discussed. So I'm very confident in the direction that they take it, all things considered. So to end off this video, I just wanted to talk about the discussion of a delay. Of course, Starfield was not shown off, completely different from my guess, which it would be. I was very vocal about how much I thought it would appear at the Game Awards, and I was admittedly wrong. But then again, not to throw everybody else under the bus, but anyone who said Microsoft would be there was basically wrong as well, because that came as a massive shock. But thankfully, there's a tweet from Aaron Greenberg where he explicitly mentions we won't have to wait long to see what's coming from Xbox. Of course, that includes Starfield. So when it comes to a discussion as to whether or not the game was delayed, I think the fact that, yes, we're getting these Q&As, we're probably going to get another one at some point, we just don't know when, and we also might have an independent Xbox event coming sometime in the future, maybe the end of December or early January. I don't think this game was delayed. I don't think we need to worry, and I wouldn't start putting on those, or rather beating on those drama drums until we get to that point where some kind of statement like that has been made, or there's some really big red flag that says, yeah, it's not making it. So until that point, I still think it's on time. Let me know your thoughts about all of this down in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, I hope to see all of you next time. So long, everybody.